to AT&T ThreatTraq for June 4th, 2013. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. I'm joined today by Jim Clausing and Tony Tortorici, and I'm John Hogoboom. So first off, on our list of stories, Jim, you have something about how it's very easy to crack passwords, possibly?
Yeah, this was a story that I came across last week in Ars Technica, and passwords have been something I've been studying here a lot in the last year or so, and came across this one. And it was an interesting story. I encourage folks to actually read the whole story. It's 3 pages on their website. But what happened here was they have a list. They had a list of 16,000 password hashes. These were unsalted MD5s, and they presented this list without any other information to 3 people, and they were able to crack anywhere from 40 to 90% of them without knowing anything more about the site where they came from. In one case, it was a complete amateur, just took one of the common tools that's out there and ran it without really tuning it or anything, and was able to crack over 40% of them. We often talk on the show, about when you're storing passwords, they need to be salted, they need to be stored securely. Ideally, use something stronger than MD5 or SHA-1. And this was a great example. In the one case, they cracked about 40% of them, or 40 or 50% of them, in an hour, using some basic techniques and some tools that are publicly available. It didn't really take any secret techniques or any super secret word lists to be able to guess these, and some of them were really strange combinations of letters. It wasn't necessarily all just dictionary words. The one in the headline, QEADZCWRSFXV1331, and guys were able to crack that one. That one is not complex. It was, or particularly complex. It was lowercase in digits, but it didn't have any specials. It didn't have any uppercase. But adding the uppercase didn't make it all that much harder for these guys. So it was just another one that got my attention. We discussed passwords just a couple weeks ago. I did a password story, and so when this one came along, I thought this was something that was worth mentioning to our audience. I find it really interesting, especially for a novice who probably isn't real familiar with the various tools, to be able to crack 40% of whatever was 16,000, so 8,000 of the passwords. In reality, depending on what the system is and what those were for, that kind of hit rate is good enough. If you could just get one account on a system, that might be able to get you further along to where you need to get. In terms of the advice to users out there, and we talk about this all the time, definitely use a longer passwords better, use upper and lower case, use special characters and digits, all of those. Did you have something else there, Jim? Yeah, well, one of the things, one of the guys did describe, the techniques that he was using to do the guessing, and he said, he guessed, he just brute forced, all of the passwords that were up to 6 characters. And that was, with the equipment he had, that was easy enough to do in a relatively short period of time. And there's a graph in, I wish I'd made a slide up for it. There's a graph in there that shows various pieces of hardware with an i7, to brute force anything above 6 probably takes a day or a week or something like that. With some of these GPUs, you can go up to 8 characters before it takes that long. Get anything longer, then they had some other techniques that they used, things like dictionary words and then 1 to 3 digits or special characters tacked on the end of it and that kind of thing. So yeah, they actually did. That's why I suggest that folks take the time to actually take a look at the article and read through it, because they did talk about some of the techniques that they use that catch a lot of the passwords that people use. So, our standard suggestions: make it long, make it complex, especially using things like lots of weird special characters, spaces, things like that. The longer the better, though, and ideally you've got websites or systems that will allow these long passwords, and that's one of the issues that we have run up against time and again.
And then also keep your password hashes safe so nobody can get them and start trying to crack them.
Now, isn't this a good case that if you have sites that allow longer passwords, that you even use spaces and come up with more like a sentence instead of just a password?
Absolutely. That's going to make it more difficult. If all of the words are in the dictionary, they still have the potential of finding them, but it's how they try to put them together and what kind of special characters they use between and so forth. But yeah, the longer the better is, and mixing in special characters and not just words out of the dictionary.
Right. Any other thoughts on different forms of authentication, or was this article just basically framing around passwords itself? I didn't know if they brought up anything about two-factor or anything else.
Yeah, no, this one was strictly about password cracking when the bad guys were able to get their hands on the hashes. And, in this case, as I said, it was unsalted MD5s, which made it particularly easy. But they argue that even salting, while it makes it somewhat more difficult, doesn't make it super difficult. And one of the things that we've talked about before is using something computationally expensive than just MD5 and SHA-1, because those are designed intentionally to be computationally relatively efficient, and when you're allowing somebody to guess them, you don't want that to be something that they can do quickly. But yeah, so it was an interesting article.
All right, yeah, thanks for bringing that one to us. So we got another story that you were looking into. So we know there's been a lot of vulnerabilities in Java, probably over the last 6 months, notably, and not everybody's upgraded. Is that the case?
Yeah, I came across this one on WebSense's blog just this morning, and it was a startling statistic. The WebSense used, and they gathered this data via their seeker network. It basically software that they've got installed on folks' computers, checking the versions and so forth. But probably remember back in April there was a big update to Java that fixed, I think, 42 serious vulnerabilities, many of which would allow remote code execution without authentication. And the frightening thing that they discovered in this analysis was that over a month later, as of the end of May, something in excess of 92% the users were still vulnerable. They had not updated to even Java 7 U21. I think there may be a 22 out since then or something. Maybe 21's the latest. I haven't checked my Java versions lately, but it was pretty scary because we made a big deal of some of these vulnerabilities at the time, and the patches are out, have been out for well over a month, almost 6 weeks now, and still almost 93% of the users that they were able to gather this data from hadn't applied the patch. They're still vulnerable to all of those issues.
Yeah, to Oracle's credit, I think they've been trying to get better about this. I know, on my machine, the Java update checker is running, and it'll pop up and say there's a new version out. Do you want to update? You, of course, want to make sure that that's the real one and not some piece of malware from a rogue website trying to trick you. But in general, I think that they've been pretty good about, letting people know that there's a new version, whereas, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, you didn't know there was a new version of Java unless you went and checked it yourself.
Yeah. I think one of the problems may be, that, like you said, the Java update checker or whatever it's called, on my home machines runs and prompts me to update, pretty much as soon as that comes out. And I'm wondering if part of the issue here is was this business users that wanted to make sure it didn't break something before they pushed it out, or what? And that much wasn't clear to me from the story, and I didn't try to dig any further into it. But with the automatic pushing of the updates, I was really surprised at that number after this long.
You brought up a really good point. The two problems that I'm seeing with this is, one, it's patch management. How fast the enterprises can roll out these patches to plug these security vulnerabilities, and it's also the awareness of the home user. They may not know to set up any sort of automatic update, or they may not care, and they don't realize that just basic web surfing or even going through your email inbox, I'm always bringing up email, are two ways that these things could be exploited. Black hole exploit kit, any sort of exploit kit loves to hit Java, and that's definitely a problem. So your patch management, home user awareness, and just your everyday usage of a computer really can trigger these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you see a reminder pop up on your computer to update your Java, make sure it's valid, and I would recommend that you do it. I know, even from personal experience, from a home perspective, my wife, pops up on her laptop, and she's like, am I supposed to do this? And I'm like, yes, you should. And I'll usually go do it for her. But, she's probably more of a normal situation that, a typical user, I guess I should say, where they're not quite sure. Is this, Java is one of those things kind of in the background. She's probably not even sure what that is or if it's something that she needs to update. So we're telling you to kind of be the spokespeople out there and make sure that you let other people know that they should update, because I'm assuming if you're watching this show, you're aware of the need to update all of your software versions, not just Java.
Right, and just to throw out an extra thing, something that I normally do is if I get something that pops up saying that, we want to update Flash or Java, as we're talking about now, sometimes my paranoia gets the best of me, and I'll actually close it out, but I'll go right to the site instead and not really trust what pops up, I'm paranoid, and go right out to Java or download the latest version of Flash directly, just so I feel a little bit better about what I'm downloading on my home PC.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point too. It's a good option as well. If you're not, absolutely sure that what you're seeing in a pop-up is something that you can trust or not.
Yeah, and the one thing that I have done for my, wife and kids is have them put something like Secunia PSI on there that keeps track. that keeps track of the versions of applications that are on your system and what the current versions are, and so that my wife and kids don't necessarily have to come ask me every time. But yeah, it's a big issue.
All right. Thanks for that one. And the next story we have is something you've been looking at, Tony, relative to the Koobface worm.
Yeah, one of the articles that I read recently discussed about the rise in the Koobface worm. The Koobface worm really targets social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth. But within the past year or so, it's been pretty flat with the amount of Koobface that's been seen. But this report by McAfee has come up with, within the last quarter, that they've seen 3 times the amount of samples of Koobface, which is definitely a concern. It is a botnet. Once it spreads, it's peer-to-peer communication, and whenever you're dealing with a botnet like that, it can do just about anything that the masters of it want it to do. In particular, with this one, the article was discussing the concerns about taking SPI, or sensitive personal information. And with a worm like this, it's a large threat. Cyber criminals use not only ways to steal money, but they also use tools like this to steal personal information, which they can also use for financial benefit. They can sell it. They can use it to their own benefit to do their own malicious activity. So this article really just discussed how Koobface is on the rise, with social media being as prevalent as it is, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. This is definitely a concern for anyone that uses social media. So the home user, as well as someone that's sitting in an enterprise that's using it, these worms have the ability to take information. And if you're in your enterprise, you not only have to worry about your personal information, but whatever information you're dealing with for the business. So worms like this, since we're seeing it on an uptick, can be used by cyber criminals for financial benefit, or they can even use it to steal enterprise data and focus on cyber espionage. The article didn't state that that's what Koobface is doing right now, but with how it's working, how it functions, it could be used for either or. The article, again, didn't state that it is being used for cyber espionage, but, I mean, if it's stealing personal information, it can steal business information as well. So it's just an article that discusses about how to be on the lookout for things dealing with social media sites, and how these worms are starting to be prevalent in it again. It was a really good article.
And you kind of talked about the cyber espionage angle, and while these particular, Koobface, there's no evidence to suggest that is occurring, we've always kind of talked and speculated about, really the technologies between your general malware and your botnets and your APT type of actor sets. There's not really much difference in the code between the two. They're kind of methods and tactics that they use during the course of their attack. And, we've always speculated that maybe someday down the road, and maybe this has already happened, we don't know, but some botnet, like Koobface, they could easily sell off interesting victims, bots that are infected with their stuff, to a third-party nation state or some other actor that is interested in using it for a different purpose than just, social media worm-type propagation stuff that they're doing. Not to say that that's happened yet, but it's always been something that's been kind of discussed as a potential that somebody may want to try to do that one day. So I guess my advice to users would be make sure you have antivirus installed and up to date. Not that that's 100%, but it's better than having nothing whatsoever.
I agree.
And make sure you have good control over your Facebook accounts, your Twitter accounts, and whatnot. The negative thing I see about these things is that when you get one of these worms, you've probably seen people get infected with maybe not Koobface, but other ones similar to this, where all of a sudden on their Facebook page, there's some kind of post that's like some goofy thing, and you're like, well, why is Bob posting this, thing? And you trust that Bob meant to post this, so you click on the link, and now all of a sudden you're infected with it, and it's posting the same kind of garbage to your Facebook page, and it just propagates that whole cycle. So it can be a reputation damaging thing where, if you do get infected, people might not be as likely to trust what you post on your Facebook page.
Absolutely. There's a lot of different facets when it comes down to social media sites, worms, and the ability to do a lot of manipulation on the PC. As you had said, once you're infected, that bot can do really anything that the master wants it to, right? Technically, with something like Koobface, it's just doing social media sites and information gathering. But as you said, that can easily adjust. The landscape could change. Someone could approach them and say, we want to use your bots for this, that, or the other. And then it can go from, stealing just information off of Facebook, posting innocent things, or not innocent, but things like that, to spread your bots to something that's hostile for like a different nation state or organized crime, so on and so forth. So yeah, bots can be used for anything. It just depends on who's behind them.
Right, that's absolutely true. So yeah, thanks for bringing that. Koobface was an interesting one. It's been around for a while. I actually wasn't aware that it was on the uprise, or it's on the uptick in terms of activity. So thanks for making us aware of that, and everybody should keep an eye out for it.
Not a problem.
I think the next thing we have is the internet weather. So let's take a look at what we've been seeing lately. And actually, to start off the internet weather report, we're going to look at something we had been seeing. So probably within the past month or so, I can't remember, I guess it was back in late April, we had seen some increased scanning on a variety of ports here, 40,601 up to 40,607 TCP, with a small number of sources in China. They were doing this kind of targeted scanning in different ports. So, some of them they had scanned for maybe a few days or a day and a half, and then they moved on to another one. And then some they were scanning across, the entire time. We weren't really sure what this is about. I guess I wanted to show what it's looked like since. So this is a longer view perspective, includes the time frame that we had before. It's a nice colorful chart, so I thought it was interesting to look at. But you can see, started around the 4/28, which happened to be a Sunday, I think. April 28th was a Sunday. And it ended on 5/19, the end of 5/19, all the scanning. You can see to the right here, there's been none since. So I don't know what that means. 5/19, May 19th, happened to be a Sunday as well. So it actually ran from a Sunday to another Sunday over the course of 3 weeks. So we don't really have any rationale for this. Initially, I was thinking, well, maybe it's something peer-to-peer-ish or something, but that wouldn't make a lot of sense if it's gone away all of a sudden. So interesting data point. We're seeing a cessation of this activity, but we don't really have an explanation for what the motivation was behind it. If anybody out there has any idea, as always, please send us an email or let us know what your thoughts are on what this activity might have been about.
Yeah, well, and it's something to keep an eye on going forward, too. Was this just recon to find machines that they may try to attack later on? So even though the scanning activity has stopped enough, something.
Right. So they might have done all of their data gathering, and now they're formulating their battle plan, and they might come back and do something to the machines that actually answered, these scan probes that they were doing during that 3-week period.
Yeah, so I'd keep an eye on those ports for another couple of weeks at least.
Right. Agreed. Okay. I thought that was an interesting one, just to show that it stopped so abruptly there. So the next one we have is there's been some increased scanning on port 8880 TCP. This is actually officially registered to the CD database protocol. If you're familiar with, I'm trying to think, there's various web services out there for compact disk database, like artist, track title type things. That's actually this protocol. So they actually have that port assigned to them. Now, whether this activity is actually related to that, I'm not quite sure, because 8880 is also frequently used for a variety of web services as kind of an alternate port, maybe for some other service related to a website or some other web application. We know that WebSphere is one of the software products that does use 8880 as well. It's just that they're not registered for that in IANA as the official owner of that port. So last 14 days is shown here. Not a whole lot of activity up until basically today. We've seen a significant increase in the amount of scanning going on in the tens of millions per hour. It's a small number of sources from France and Czechoslovakia, just a small handful. So, keep an eye out for that one. If you have that port open and exposed, or you're running WebSphere and you have that open, that might be something, when I say open, I mean accessible from an internet-facing standpoint. You might want to keep an eye on that one and or lock it down to only those machines that need to access that server and that service. Next one is port 1080 TCP. Now, there's always kind of a noise floor with this. This is SOX proxy. It's basically the SOX proxy protocol is a method to kind of proxy a network connection. And a lot of people look for various sites out there that are open SOX proxies because they can kind of obfuscate their activity by kind of relaying their activity through these open SOX proxies. It's even better than like a web proxy because you can proxy entire network connections as well. So there's been an increase in scanning on that. This is the last 14 days shown, and not as aggressive as the last one we're looking at. It's up around the 6.5 million per hour number of scan flows, mostly U.S. sources, interestingly. There's a lot of sources involved in this, which would lead me to believe there's probably some sort of botnet involved because there are so many at one time trying to scan it that there's some kind of coordination going on there. In any event, another interesting one to keep an eye out if you are running an open SOX proxy. I'm not sure why you would have it completely open to the world, but I wouldn't recommend that you do, but it would probably be abused by these actors who are looking for open SOX proxies in order to hide where they're coming from. And I think lastly, we have an increased scanning on 53 TCP DNS, mostly from a single source IP in China. 53 TCP is not normally how most DNS request response activity occurs unless it's an oversized type of response and it gets forced to TCP mode. Most of it's in UDP. But it's still likely that they're looking for DNS servers would be my guess here. And we have seen an increase in DNS amplification attacks and or reflection attacks. So if you have a DNS server that is what we call an open resolver, basically anybody on the internet can ask that DNS server to look up a domain name and it'll give a response back. That's something that you would definitely want to take a look at and lock down or filter access to that DNS server only to source IPs owned by your company or to areas of your subnet blocks that you trust to be connecting to it. Because typically what happens is you'll get attackers will spoof a source IP in a UDP packet, send it to your open resolver, and then the response is going to go back to that source IP who's really the target, not the guy that actually made the packet, so they can reflect and bounce packets towards a real intended victim. So basically what they do is they turn your open resolver into part of their attack infrastructure, and now your open resolver is acting as an attacker against somebody, and you're probably not even aware that's happening other than your DNS server is responding slowly. So long story, to get to the point of this one, if you do have open DNS servers accessible to the internet, take a look at that. That's probably what this activity is related to. They're probably looking for additional devices that they can use to attack other people in a reflection type manner. And the top 10 pie charts we have, there's really not much of a change over previous weeks. 445 TCP, which is your Windows file sharing SMB type stuff. 1433 TCP is your Microsoft SQL Server. 3389 is Remote Desktop Protocol. 22 TCP SSH. 5900 is VNC. And those are your remote access type ones, although the 1433 and 445 are not. 135 NetBIOS type stuff as well, file sharing. And then 8080, we've talked about this one before. It's kind of interesting. This one's not normally, I don't think, in the top 10 report. But we do know that there's various things happening with 8080 lately. So we know that there's sometimes open proxy servers running on there. We also know that Tomcat runs on there, and there's been some aggressive scanning for Tomcat servers over the past few months. And there's probably other additional web services running on 8080 that people might be looking for to abuse or exploit in some way. And then the other outliers here are 16464 and 16471, which are the zero-access botnet. So take a look at the next one, and you can see the zero-access stuff is a little more prominent. This shows the most number of sources probing, not the most number of probes, which was the previous chart. So in terms of the most actors probing on a particular port, zero access is a pretty big botnet in the millions probably or more. It's definitely over 1 million. We see a lot of activity shown in this chart because of that, and these ports 16, 464, 465, 470, and 471 UDP are all related to zero access. Other than that, some of these other ones could be backscatter type things, your ICMP echo requests and replies, could be various just network. It might not be security related, but also could be some types of backscatter activity from other scanning activity going on. And 23 TCP telnet. So people are looking for telnet servers out there. A lot of these home routers have telnet open by default, which they shouldn't, but some do. So that could be a scan looking for that or other telnet-related enabled services on different types of appliances. Web servers, port 80 TCP, and then, of course, remote desktop protocol is a big one. I always say this, if you run remote desktop protocol and it's available to anybody on the internet to connect to, you're a fool. You really need to lock that down because not only are there very motivated actors trying to brute force their way into your remote desktop server, there's also worms like the Mortar worm that are out there, which are aggressively scanning. I think I talked once upon a time where I set up a remote desktop server on the internet, and it was literally compromised by Morto. I did put a simple password on there, but it was literally compromised by Morto within an hour. So be very careful, especially with that one, as well as all the others. But note, I'll just give you a little case story on that one. Anybody have any thoughts on that stuff? If not, we'll move on to the top concerns. And I think the top concern I have for this week was around the area of home routers. This probably isn't really a business-related thing, but something to think about is we've seen over the past, I know last Friday there was a nice report that came out. We didn't cover it here on the show today. There was another article that came out talking about a certain home router vendor has various remote command injection vulnerabilities for certain flavors of its home router. And basically it's kind of a drive-by infection. You might visit a website, and when you do that, it downloads some JavaScript and or Java into your browser, and now running inside your browser is a little program that's going to try to attack your home router via the inside. And typically what they'll do is they'll try to just go and connect to it with the default passwords for that type of router. So they'll use like admin or admin password. There's probably some other types of default passwords for various vendors out there. And if they can do that, they'll change some settings and or upload some rogue firmware to it. So we know that there's been an increase in activity on the three of the major vendors in terms of these remote command injection vulnerabilities that are publicly available to the world. And it's pretty easy to compromise as long as you can steer somebody to kind of go to your website. You can, try to trigger this payload and have it compromise their home router. So what I would recommend is, a lot of people don't do this, but go check if there's any updates or firmware updates for your home router. If you haven't applied them in a while, I would highly recommend that you do that. Also consider how open your home router is to the wireless side. So if it's a wireless home router, if you don't have any WPA, I would hope you have WPA over web encryption, but have some kind of encryption. Don't have it open to the world to connect to, because more often than not, if someone could connect to your wireless network from the street side or outside of your, actual home, they can usually get to the web control panel as well. And if you don't change your password to something other than the default passwords, they're right in there. So make sure you have good security profile on those devices, because that's kind of your perimeter defense at home.
Yeah, one of the things about this one that, as you said, we didn't report on it, but TrustWave did mention it on Friday, is web interface for managing these home routers. In this case, it was the web interface could be used for command injection even without authentication. So I agree. You don't want to have too much available on the wireless side, but for some of these devices, you might want to not have the web management interface for the home router available unless you're physically plugged into it or something. Yeah, if somebody could get you to surf to the wrong site so that they could download that JavaScript or Java into your browser and attack from the inside, where the trusted side of the little firewall. These kind of flaws, and as you said, they happen to all of the vendors, and there have been attacks against the three biggies all in the last couple of months. So, yeah, it's something that I agree we need to be reminded of from time to time.
Was there anything in the articles that you read about cached credentials with the web browser when it comes down to these devices, or is it just standard passwords, default passwords, so on and so forth?
This particular one, the most recent one that I read about last week, didn't require any credentials. It was public status page. There was a command injection flaw there that you could get it to execute a command on the device. With some of the other ones, they usually, the ones that I recall recently, have relied mostly on trying to guess passwords or left a default password. I don't recall too many of them that looked for cached credentials, but that doesn't mean that some of the bad guys won't.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point that I hadn't thought about. One of the first tests that their exploit code could try is just connect to the home router, maybe 192.168.1.1, and see if they get the page back, which might mean that you have already managed the router at some point, within the day or something, and left your browser up. It still has the cookie with authentication to get into that browser, or you have the password saved in your cache, and it can just automatically connect. So, interesting thought, and definitely something to be aware of. If you do log into your web control panel on your browser, on your home router, you might want to make sure you close all your browsers and make sure you don't keep that in your cache. So, Jim, you had a top concern for this week?
Yeah, and it related to what we had talked about earlier about the patch management. That seems to be my top concern most of the time anyway, is keeping on top of the patches. And as I mentioned earlier, there are some companies that have created a business model around this, and if you don't have some other, enterprise software management kind of deal, it's worth looking into some of these so that they can keep track of what other vendors have released patches for their software, so that you don't have to, because that's been one of my biggies for a long time, is how can any human being keep on top of the patches from all of the vendors for all of the software that they've got running on all of their machines. So if you don't have some sort of enterprise system in place to manage that yourself, there are companies out there that offer products that do that, and for home users, there are companies that offer products that do that are free. So somehow this is an issue that is going to dog us for probably the rest of my career. And just got to find some way to help the users keep on top of it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just getting more complex with, in addition to not only software in your computer, but, these embedded appliances and whatnot. We're talking about home routers, but that could extend to all kinds of devices, like your TVs and who knows what else down the road, your DVD players and other things like that. There's all kinds of devices that have updatable capabilities with new firmware from time to time, but you don't really have a good way to know that it's available from all of them. All right, so that's our show for today. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ThreatTraq@list.att.com. You can also find us on Twitter at the keyword @ThreatTraq. And the ThreatTraq video is available at att.com/ThreatTraq and on YouTube as well. You can also subscribe to an audio-only version of iTunes so you can listen to your car on the way to work or on the way home. And thanks again for joining us today. Thanks, Jim and Tony. And we'll be back next week with a new episode. Until then, keep your network safe.